The morning sun streamed through the airport windows as Amara Johnson tightened her grip on her backpack and joined the line for boarding. She glanced at her phone, 6:42 a.m. Too early to function properly, but she had no choice. Class would resume tomorrow morning, and she needed to get back to campus today. Group of passengers may now begin boarding, announced the gate agent. Amara sighed with relief. At least one thing was going right today. She'd spent extra on early boarding specifically to ensure she'd get her window seat without any hassle. After an emotionally draining weekend visiting her family, all she wanted was to lean against the window, close her eyes, and forget the world for a few hours. She shuffled forward with the other passengers, boarding pass ready on her phone. The agent scanned it with a smile. "Have a good flight." The jet bridge felt stuffy as Amara made her way down, counting the rows until she reached 23. There it was, 23A, her window seat. She tucked her small backpack under the seat in front of her and settled in. The plane was still mostly empty, a rare moment of peace before the chaos of a full flight. Amara pulled out her noise-canceling headphones, a splurge from her summer job earnings. They weren't the fancy brand, but they did the job. She slipped them over her ears, selected her sleep playlist, and closed her eyes as the soft melody began. Outside the window, ground crew scurried about like busy ants, loading luggage and preparing for departure. Amara watched them for a moment, then turned away. 5 hours in this seat, and then she'd be back to her dorm, her books, and her path to becoming a doctor. Her parents hadn't been thrilled when she told them about switching from business to pre-med, but she couldn't live her life to please them forever. This visit home had been tense, with unspoken disappointment hanging in the air. The plane gradually filled with other passengers. A businessman in a wrinkled suit took the aisle seat in her row, but left the middle open. Maybe she'd get lucky and have extra space. Amara closed her eyes again, letting her shoulders relax for what felt like the first time all weekend. She didn't notice when the final boarding call was announced. Her music had carried her to that peaceful place between wakefulness and sleep. The jostling of passengers finding their seats faded away, the cabin noise dulled by her headphones. A tap on her shoulder brought her back. Thinking it might be the flight attendant asking for her drink order, Amara opened her eyes and removed one side of her headphones. It wasn't a flight attendant. A woman in her 40s stood in the aisle, her lips pressed into a thin line. Next to her, a boy about 8 years old clutched a gaming device, his eyes darting nervously between his mother and Amara. "These are our seats," the woman said, pointing to the middle and aisle positions in Amara's row. The businessman had apparently moved elsewhere. She checked her boarding pass again and showed it to Amara. 23B and C. Amara nodded and began to put her headphones back on, not seeing any issue. "Wait," the woman said sharply. "My son gets very anxious on planes. He needs to sit by the window. You'll have to move." Amara blinked, momentarily confused. "I'm sorry, but this is my assigned seat. I specifically chose it when I booked my ticket." The woman's face hardened. "He's just a child. Surely you can be flexible. He needs to see outside to feel calm." Amara felt a familiar knot form in her stomach, the same feeling she got whenever someone expected her to give up something she had every right to. She paid extra for this seat. She'd boarded early to make sure she got it. Why should she move? "I understand," Amara said carefully, aware of how easily situations like this could escalate. "But I also specifically reserved this seat. There might be other window seats available if you check with the flight attendant." The woman's nostrils flared as she tightened her grip on her son's shoulder. What had started as a simple request was quickly becoming something else entirely, something Amara had encountered too many times before. The woman stared down at Amara as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son fidgeted beside her, eyes glued to his gaming device, seemingly more interested in his game than the window seat his mother was demanding. "Look," the woman said, her voice rising slightly, "my name is Karen Whitman, and we're not asking for much here. Tyler gets very anxious on flights." Passengers settling into nearby rows were beginning to notice the exchange. An older man across the aisle glanced up from his newspaper, then quickly looked back down, clearly not wanting to get involved. "I understand that flying can be stressful for kids," Amara replied, trying to keep her voice level and reasonable. but I specifically chose and paid extra for this seat because I need to sleep on this flight before heading back to classes tomorrow. Karen's eyes narrowed. Well, my husband and I paid good money for our tickets too. I'm sure you can sleep just fine in a middle seat. Amara took a deep breath. She'd been in situations like this before, where saying no somehow made her the villain. She thought about just giving in to avoid the scene that was clearly brewing. But something inside her pushed back against that familiar pressure. I'm sorry, but no. This is my assigned seat. Karen's face flushed red. Do you have any idea how difficult it is traveling with a child? A little compassion would be nice. Tyler finally looked up from his game. Mom, it's okay. I don't really. No, it's not okay. Karen cut him off. Some people need to learn how to be considerate. She turned back to Amara. I'm not asking anymore. My son needs this seat. An uncomfortable silence fell over their section of the plane. A few passengers were openly watching now. Amara felt her cheeks grow warm under their stares. Ma'am, Amara said quietly, I've already explained that I paid extra specifically for this window seat. I'm not going to move. Karen leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a harsh whisper. Listen, I don't know where you're from or how things work there, but around here, we look out for children first. Maybe in your culture that's not important. The words hit Amara like a slap. The real issue was emerging, as it often did, in little digs and coded language. She'd grown up hearing these subtle jabs her whole life, comments that could be explained away, but carried unmistakable meaning. My culture, Amara repeated, loud enough for others to hear. I was born in Cleveland, and this has nothing to do with culture. It's about the seat I paid for. A flight attendant passing by slowed, sensing the tension, but continued down the aisle after Karen waved her off with a "We're fine." You young people today, Karen continued, shaking her head. No respect. When I was your age, I would have gladly given up my seat for a child. Then you're welcome to give up your seat for your son, Amara pointed out. You could sit in the middle, and he could have the aisle. Karen's mouth opened and closed. That's not. He needs the window. You're just being difficult on purpose now. Tyler tugged at his mother's sleeve. Mom, I don't really need. Hush, Tyler. Karen's voice was sharp. She adjusted her designer purse on her shoulder and looked down the aisle. I need to speak to someone in charge. She raised her hand, trying to flag down a flight attendant. A few rows ahead, a man in uniform was helping an elderly passenger stow her bag. Excuse me, Karen called out. Flight attendant, we have a situation here. The flight attendant glanced back, held up one finger indicating he'd be there in a moment. Karen turned back to Amara with a triumphant look. We'll just see what the airline has to say about this. I'm a platinum member, you know. I fly this route twice a month. Amara said nothing, but her stomach tightened. Would the flight attendant just ask her to move to avoid a scene? Would he take one look at Karen, confident, well-dressed, throwing around her status, and decide Amara was the problem? She'd seen it happen before. Sometimes it seemed easier for everyone if she just gave in, moved aside, took up less space. But not today, not this time. The flight attendant was making his way toward them now, his face professionally neutral as he approached what was clearly a tense situation. Amara straightened in her seat, preparing herself for whatever came next. The flight attendant paused a few feet away to help another passenger, and Karen's impatience visibly grew. She tapped her foot and kept glancing between Amara and the busy crew member. Unbelievable, Karen muttered, just loud enough for Amara to hear. I've never had this much trouble before. Amara kept her eyes forward, trying to focus on her breathing. A part of her wished she'd just give up the seat and end this whole uncomfortable scene. But a stronger part reminded her that she had every right to be exactly where she was. A young couple seated across the aisle exchanged glances. The woman leaned over and whispered something to her partner, who frowned and nodded. You know, Karen said, raising her voice slightly, I could have just sat down. I was trying to be polite by asking first. Amara finally looked up at her. And I politely declined. That should have been the end of it. Well, it's not the end of it, Karen snapped. Not everyone gets what they want in life. That's a lesson you clearly need to learn. Tyler had shrunk into himself, his game forgotten as his eyes darted between his mother and Amara. "Mom, please," he whispered. "Everyone's looking." He wasn't wrong. At least a dozen passengers were now openly watching the confrontation, some with disapproval, others with uncomfortable curiosity. "Let them look," Karen replied loudly. "Maybe someone with common decency will offer their window seat to a child." No one moved. The silence grew heavier. "Ma'am," Amara said carefully, "I understand you're frustrated, but this isn't about common decency. It's about assigned seating." Karen let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, now you're going to lecture me about decency. That's rich coming from someone who won't move for a child." An older woman 3 rows ahead turned around fully in her seat. "The young lady has a point," she called out. "Those are assigned seats." Karen's head whipped toward the newcomer to their dispute. "This doesn't concern you," she said coldly. "You're making it everyone's concern with how loud you're being," the woman replied, unintimidated. Karen's face flushed deeper. She turned back to Amara. "I'm not asking anymore," she said, her voice dangerously low. "Move. Now." Amara felt a chill run through her body at the woman's tone. "No," she said simply. "You people are all the same," Karen hissed, "always making everything so difficult." The words hung in the air. There was no mistaking her meaning now. A man in a business suit sitting nearby cleared his throat loudly. "I think that's enough," he said firmly. Karen ignored him, focusing all her attention on Amara. "I know exactly what you're doing. Playing the victim when you're the one causing problems. Acting like you don't understand basic courtesy." The flight attendant finally approached, his name tag reading Michael. He had dark hair and a tired but professional smile. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between the two women. "Yes," Karen said immediately, her tone changing to something sweeter. "There's been a mix-up with our seats. My son has severe anxiety and needs the window seat, but this person is refusing to accommodate us." Michael turned to Amara. "Ma'am." Before Amara could speak, Karen jumped in again. "We're Platinum members, by the way. My husband flies for business twice a week with your airline. I'd hate to have to tell him about the poor service we received today." The threat hung in the air. Amara's heart sank a little. She'd seen this play out before, people like Karen using their status and connections to get their way, regardless of who got pushed aside. "I have my assigned seat," Amara said simply, showing her boarding pass on her phone. 23A, "I specifically paid extra for early boarding to secure a window seat for this long flight." Karen made a dismissive gesture. "Anyone can pay for early boarding. That doesn't give you the right to ignore a child's needs. My son gets physically ill in middle seats." Tyler looked up, confusion crossing his face at this new information. The flight attendant glanced at his tablet. The whole section of the plane was silent now, waiting to see what would happen next. Amara could feel dozens of eyes on her, judging, wondering why she wouldn't just move and end this conflict. Michael looked from his tablet to Karen, then to Amara. His face revealed nothing of what he was thinking. "Let me check on something," he said carefully. "I'll be right back." Michael returned a few minutes later, his tablet still in hand. The tension in the air had only grown thicker during his absence. Karen stood in the aisle, arms crossed, occasionally glancing at her watch and sighing loudly. Tyler had sunken deeper into himself, his game system forgotten on his lap. "Mom," he whispered, tugging at her sleeve. "Can we just sit down?" "I don't need the window." Karen brushed his hand away. "Hushed, Tyler. This is about principles." She straightened her blouse as Michael approached, putting on what Amara recognized as a customer service smile, the kind reserved for people you believed would give you what you wanted. "Thanks for your patience," Michael said, his voice calm and professional. He'd clearly handled situations like this before. "I've checked our seating arrangements and availability." Karen nodded expectantly. "Perfect. So you can sort this out now." Michael turned to Amara first. "Ma'am, I see that you purchased seat 23A during booking and paid the premium for seat selection. Is that correct?" Amara nodded, relief flooding through her. He was acknowledging her right to the seat. "Yes, that's right." Karen made a small noise of disbelief. "Excuse me," she interrupted, "but I don't think you understand the situation. My son has severe anxiety. This isn't about who paid what fee." Michael turned to her with the same professional expression. "I understand your concern, Mrs. Whitman. Your boarding passes show you and your son are assigned to 23B and 23C. Did you request a window seat during booking? Karen's confident smile faltered slightly. Well, no, but that's because the system wouldn't let me choose seats together in a window row. The point is, my son needs the window now that we're here. Surely your airline can accommodate a child. I'm sorry to hear about your son's anxiety, Michael said, glancing at Tyler, who was now staring at his shoes. Did you mention this medical need to our gate agents before boarding? I shouldn't have to explain medical needs to everyone I meet, Karen said, her voice rising again. This is about customer service. Do you know how much money my husband and I spend with this airline every year? A few rows ahead, someone muttered something that sounded like "here we go," loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Michael's expression never changed. Mrs. Whitman, I understand your frustration, but our policy is clear. Passengers are entitled to the seats they've selected and paid for. Karen's mouth dropped open. She seemed genuinely shocked that she wasn't getting her way. I want to speak to your supervisor, she demanded. The lead flight attendant is currently preparing for takeoff, Michael replied smoothly. But I'm authorized to handle seating arrangements. This is ridiculous, Karen said, looking around at other passengers as if seeking support. I've never been treated this way before. Don't you understand who I am? An uncomfortable silence followed. Even Tyler looked mortified now. Mrs. Whitman, Michael continued, lowering his voice slightly, I can check if any other passengers would be willing to switch seats voluntarily. Or I can see if there are window seats available on our next flight, which departs in 3 hours. Karen's face flushed a deep red. Next flight? We're not taking another flight. We have plans. I understand, Michael nodded. Then let me see if anyone would be willing to switch. He turned to address the nearby rows. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a young passenger who would prefer a window seat. If anyone in a window seat would be willing to trade for a middle seat in row 23, please raise your hand. The silence that followed was deafening. Not a single hand went up. Karen's eyes narrowed as she looked at Amara again. This is your fault, she hissed under her breath. Amara remained silent, keeping her gaze forward. She wasn't going to be baited into making a scene. Michael waited a reasonable amount of time before turning back to Karen. I'm afraid no one is volunteering to switch at this time. You and your son are welcome to take your assigned seats, or I can check about that later flight. Karen's chest heaved with indignation. She looked around one more time, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Do you have any idea who my husband is? She asked, her voice quivering with anger. I'm sorry, ma'am, Michael replied, his tone still professionally polite. Would you like me to help you with your bags in your assigned seats? Karen stood frozen in the aisle, her face a mask of disbelief. She glanced around the cabin as if waiting for someone to jump in and support her. No one did. This is unacceptable, she finally said, her voice trembling slightly. Completely unacceptable. Michael maintained his professional demeanor. I understand you're disappointed, Mrs. Whitman. If you'd like to take your assigned seats, I'd be happy to help you get settled. We're scheduled to push back from the gate in about 15 minutes. The reminder of the ticking clock seemed to hit Karen hard. She looked at her son, then back at Michael, then threw a cold glance at Amara. Fine, she snapped. But I want your full name and your employee ID number. Without missing a beat, Michael pointed to his name tag. Michael Chen, employee number 45,873. I'll be happy to write that down for you if you'd like. Karen seemed taken aback by his calm response. She'd clearly expected him to be intimidated by her threat. After a moment's hesitation, she nudged Tyler toward the middle seat. I'll be speaking to customer service about this, she muttered as she took the aisle seat beside her son. You're welcome to do that, ma'am, Michael replied evenly. Is there anything else I can help you with before takeoff? Karen turned away without answering, making a show of pulling out her phone and typing furiously, presumably composing an angry email to the airline. An older woman seated across the aisle caught Amara's eye and gave her a small, supportive smile. Amara returned it gratefully, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't realized how tense her body had become during the confrontation. Michael finished helping a few other passengers with their bags, then returned to their row. Can I get any of you a water or juice before takeoff? He asked, addressing all three of them. No thanks, Amara replied quietly. Karen ignored him completely. Tyler hesitated, then whispered, "Water, please." Michael nodded kindly, coming right up. As he moved away, Amara felt Karen's eyes on her. She kept her gaze fixed on the safety card in the seat pocket, pretending to read it with intense interest. "I hope you're happy," Karen said in a low voice that only Amara could hear, making a child uncomfortable just to prove a point. Amara considered responding but decided against it. Nothing she could say would change Karen's mind, and engaging further would only make the next 5 hours more unbearable. Michael returned with Tyler's water. As he handed it to the boy, he paused and addressed Amara. "Ma'am, I apologize for any discomfort this situation may have caused you." The unexpected apology caught Amara off guard. "Thank you," she managed to say. Karen made a small huffing sound beside her. "It's our policy to ensure all passengers have access to their assigned seats," Michael continued. "If you need anything during the flight, please don't hesitate to let me know." The message was clear. He was letting Karen know that he recognized what had happened and whose side he was on. It wasn't about taking sides, really. It was about fairness and following the rules that everyone agreed to when purchasing their tickets. As Michael moved away to continue his pre-flight duties, the older woman across the aisle leaned over. "Good for you, honey," she said to Amara. "Standing your ground." Heat rose to Amara's cheeks. She hadn't wanted to make a scene or be noticed. She just wanted to get home without trouble. "Thanks," she replied softly. A few other passengers nearby nodded in agreement. A man 2 rows ahead gave her a thumbs up. Somehow, without intending to, Amara had become the center of a small moment of solidarity. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their departure and apologizing for the slight delay. Amara leaned back in her seat, and closed her eyes. The plane began to push back from the gate. Beside her, Tyler had returned to his game, seeming perfectly content in his middle seat. Karen remained rigid, staring straight ahead, her jaw clenched tight. For the first time since boarding, Amara felt herself relax. She hadn't given in, she hadn't moved aside. And surprisingly, the system had actually worked the way it was supposed to. The plane climbed steadily through patches of clouds, the engines humming a constant background noise that Amara found oddly comforting. She kept her eyes closed, trying to catch up on the sleep she desperately needed before returning to her packed class schedule tomorrow. But sleep wouldn't come. Despite her physical exhaustion, her mind kept replaying the confrontation. She wasn't a confrontational person by nature. Most of the time, she chose peace over conflict, bending to avoid breaking. How many times has she switched seats, moved out of the way, or stepped aside just to keep things smooth? Today had been different. Maybe it was the stress of her visit home, or the fact that she'd specifically paid extra for this seat, or just the accumulated weight of always being the one expected to move. Whatever the reason, she'd held her ground. The drink service began about 30 minutes into the flight. Michael started from the front of the plane, working his way back row by row. Amara could track his progress by the squeaking wheels of the beverage cart. When he reached their row, he smiled politely at all 3 of them. "What can I get you to drink?" "Just water, please," Amara said. Tyler asked for apple juice. Karen didn't respond at first, staring straight ahead as if the flight attendant were invisible. "Ma'am," Michael prompted gently, "would you care for a beverage?" "I'll have a vodka tonic," she finally replied, her voice clipped. "Double." Michael nodded. "I'll need to see your ID for alcoholic beverages." The request seemed to irritate Karen further, but she pulled out her wallet and practically shoved her driver's license at him. He checked it quickly, then prepared her drink. As he handed Amara her water, their eyes met briefly. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition of what had happened and how it had been resolved. "Thanks," Amara said, meaning more than just the water. "My pleasure," Michael replied with a small nod. The beverage service continued down the aisle. Karen took a long sip of her drink, then another. The tension in her shoulders seemed to ease slightly as the alcohol hit her system. About an hour into the flight, something unexpected happened. Tyler turned to Amara, his voice barely above a whisper. "I like your headphones. What kind are they?" Amara blinked in surprise. "They're just basic noise-canceling ones," she replied carefully. unsure if Karen would object to her son talking to her. Nothing fancy, but they work pretty well. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. My mom says I can get a pair if I keep my grades up. Karen was pretending to be absorbed in the in-flight magazine, but Amara could tell she was listening to every word. They help a lot on flights, Amara offered. And for studying. Are you in college? Tyler asked, his voice gaining confidence. Amara nodded. Pre-med, second year. Cool. Tyler said, genuinely impressed. I want to be a veterinarian. Despite herself, Amara smiled. That's a great goal. You must really like animals. Yeah, we have 2 cats and a hamster, Tyler said, warming to the conversation. The hamster's name is Rocket because he runs around super fast. Karen closed the magazine with a snap. Tyler, leave the lady alone. She clearly wants to rest. Tyler's face fell. Sorry, he mumbled, turning back to his game. It's okay, Amara said quickly. I don't mind talking. But the moment had passed. The brief, normal human connection had been severed. As the flight progressed, Amara noticed other passengers occasionally glancing back at their row, some offering small smiles of support. Word had clearly spread through the cabin about what had happened during boarding. The older woman who had spoken up earlier stopped by their row on her way to the restroom. She paused, looking directly at Karen. You know, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness, when I was raising my children, I taught them that respect is earned, not demanded. And that the best way to teach that lesson is by example. Karen's face flushed, but before she could respond, the woman had continued down the aisle. Tyler looked up from his game, a thoughtful expression on his young face as he watched the woman walk away. For the first time since they'd taken off, Amara felt something shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about the lessons being taught and learned in this cramped metal tube hurtling through the sky. Lessons about standing up for yourself, about respect, about seeing others as human beings worthy of dignity. And somehow, in a way Amara hadn't expected, she found herself hoping that Tyler was learning the right ones. The flight continued with an uncomfortable silence hanging over row 14. The young college student kept his eyes fixed on his economics textbook, though his mind couldn't focus on the supply and demand curves anymore. Every now and then, he would steal a glance out the window, watching the clouds drift by beneath the wing, trying to enjoy the view he had rightfully paid for. About halfway through the flight, the attendant with the kind eyes returned, pushing the beverage cart. She paused longer at their row than others. Would you like some extra pretzels? She asked the student with a warm smile, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. It was a small gesture, but its meaning wasn't lost on anyone. When she handed him his ginger ale, she leaned in slightly. I'm really sorry about what happened earlier, she said quietly. Nobody should have to defend their right to sit in a seat they paid for, especially not on my flight. The student nodded gratefully. Thank you for stepping in, he replied. Sometimes it's easier to just give in, you know? Avoid making a scene. That's exactly what some people count on, she answered, her eyes reflecting understanding beyond her years. But not today. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, something unexpected happened. The woman's son, who had been quietly playing a game on his tablet, turned to the student. Can you see the city from there? He asked shyly, genuine curiosity in his voice. Yeah, actually, the student replied after a moment of surprise. Want to have a quick look? The boy glanced at his mother, who was pretending to be absorbed in a magazine, then nodded eagerly. The student shifted slightly as the boy leaned over to peek through the window, his face lighting up at the sprawling cityscape below. Cool, the boy whispered before settling back into his seat. When the plane finally landed and passengers began gathering their belongings, the tension that had filled their row seemed to dissipate slightly. The mother kept her eyes down, quickly collecting her things without a word or glance toward the student. But something remarkable happened as passengers started to exit. An older gentleman from across the aisle stopped by the student's seat. Young man, he said, his voice weathered but strong, I want you to know I've been in your position more times than I can remember in my 67 years. It did my heart good to see you stand your ground with such dignity. He extended his hand, which the student shook firmly. A middle-aged couple paused next to them. We were sitting a few rows back, the woman said. Just wanted to say we're glad the airline staff did the right thing. Too often people just look the other way. By the time the student stepped into the terminal, 5 different passengers had made similar comments. A teenage girl even approached with her parents and said, "I recorded what happened and posted it on my social media. People need to see this stuff still happens and also how it should be handled." 2 weeks later, the student's own social media post about the experience had been shared over 50,000 times. The airline, responding to both criticism and praise, issued a statement standing by their flight attendants' actions and announcing a refresher training program on passenger equality for all staff. The most meaningful message, however, came through his university email. It was from the flight attendant. "Just wanted you to know that your calm handling of that situation made an impact on our crew," she wrote. "We deal with entitled passengers daily, but rarely get to see such grace under pressure. Thank you for making my job easier that day, not harder. Safe travels always." The student smiled as he read it, feeling something shift inside him. Perhaps for the first time, he fully understood that sometimes standing up for yourself can create ripples that reach farther than you'd ever imagine.